There were 3 kinds of medical man in England in 1816, and the most expensive of them was forbidden to touch you. That is not a figure of speech, and it is not an exaggeration for the sake of a story. A physician was a gentleman. He held a degree from Oxford or Cambridge or Edinburgh. He was a fellow or a licentiate of the Royal College of Physicians. He was addressed as doctor, and he charged a guinea to come into your house and look at you and tell you what was wrong. What he did not do, what he could not do, without ceasing to be a gentleman and becoming something else entirely, was use his hands. Hands were trade, cutting, setting, drawing, stitching, lancing. All of it was manual work, and manual work belonged to the surgeon, who was addressed as Mr., and who had come up by apprenticeship rather than by degree, and who, whatever his skill, ranked several rungs below the man who merely stood at the bedside and named the disease. 200 years later, England still calls its senior surgeons Mr. instead of Doctor. And almost nobody remembers that the title is a scar. Score to Regency lullabies, and tell me in the comments what country you are listening from tonight. On the 11th of February 1816, at about 20 minutes to 4 in the afternoon, a 9-year-old boy named Thomas Ellery came off a pony in the frozen paddock at Wrenfield in Derbyshire and broke his right thigh. He was not doing anything he had been forbidden. That mattered a great deal afterwards to everybody except him. He had been trotting a fat elderly pony called Barnabas in circles, under supervision, in the safest field on the estate, and Barnabas had put a foot into a rut that the frost had made invisible and had gone down onto his knees, and Tom had gone over his shoulder and landed badly with the whole weight of the pony's chest coming across his leg for about a second and a half. Ruth Ardern reached him before the groom did, because she had been standing at the paddock rail, and the groom had been at the gate. She was 27 years old. She had been governess at Wrenfield for 2 years and 4 months. She was paid £35 a year, and she knew what she was looking at from 8 feet away. The right leg was short. That was the thing you saw first, and it was the thing that told you everything, because a leg that is suddenly 2 inches shorter than the other one is not bruised, and is not sprained. It is broken across the shaft, and the muscle has pulled the 2 ends past each other, like a man closing a drawer. The foot was turned out. Above the knee, the thigh had already begun to swell into a shape that was not a shape a thigh makes. Tom was not screaming. That frightened her more than screaming would have. He was making a low, continuous sound, with his mouth shut and his eyes very wide, and his skin had gone the color of skimmed milk, and when she got her hand under his head, his forehead was wet and cold. "Do not move him," she said to the groom, who had arrived and was reaching. "Do not touch the leg at all. Get 4 men and the door off the tack room and blankets, and send somebody to the house on the fast horse before you do anything else." The groom was 19, and did what he was told, which was fortunate for everybody. Ruth Ardern knelt in the frozen mud, with her hand on the boy's forehead and her fingers, without any conscious decision on her part, went to the inside of his ankle, to the hollow behind the bone, and found what she was looking for, and counted it against the count in her own throat. It was there. It was fast, and it was thin, but it was there. That was the number that mattered, and she was the only person on the Wrenfield estate who knew it was a number at all. They got him to the house at 4:20 on a tack room door, with 4 men carrying, and Ruth walking beside with both hands cupped round his thigh to stop the ends grinding, which is the single most useful thing anybody did that day, and which nobody afterwards ever mentioned. They put him in the blue bedchamber on the 1st floor because it was nearest the stairhead. Mrs. Rusholme, the housekeeper, a Derbyshire woman of 48, who had been at Wrenfield since she was 14, took one look and sent for 3 people. She sent to Bakewell for Dr. Fenn. She sent to Ashford for Mr. Coles the surgeon. And she sent the 2nd groom on the good horse to Chatsworth, where the Duke of Wrenfield had gone that morning to look at a drainage scheme, and was not expected back before dark. Then she stood in the doorway of the blue bedchamber with her hands folded into her apron and said, "To nobody, 9 years old." Because that was the other thing about Tom Ellery, and it is necessary to understand it before anything else in this story makes sense. He was not the Duke's son. The Duke of Wrenfield had no sons. Marcus Ellery was 36, unmarried, and had inherited 3 years earlier, when his elder brother Charles and Charles' wife had both been carried off inside 11 days by a putrid fever that had come through the village in the autumn of 1813 and taken 19 people. Charles had left 1 child, so the boy in the blue bedchamber was the Duke's nephew, the Duke's ward, and the entire future of the Wrenfield title in one 9-year-old body. And there was not a person in that house who did not know it, and there was not a person in that house who had not, at some point in the last 3 years, watched Marcus Ellery look at his brother's child with an expression they had all privately agreed not to discuss. Dr. Aubrey Fenn arrived at 25 minutes past 5, having been fetched 11 miles in the dark and being, to be entirely fair to him, considerably put out about it and entirely willing to come anyway. He was 53. He had an Edinburgh degree. He was a licentiate of the Royal College of Physicians. He had attended the 2nd Marquess of something for a decade before retiring into Derbyshire. And he was, in the ordinary business of his profession, a genuinely competent man. He knew more about fevers than anybody within 40 miles. He had read Cullen and Curry, and he had opinions about bark and about bleeding that were, for 1816, on the sensible end of the argument. He came into the blue bedchamber in a good coat with his hat under his arm, and he did not put down his gloves. That was the first thing Ruth Ardern noticed, and she noticed it because she had spent the first 16 years of her life in a house where the first thing anybody did on coming in to a hurt person was wash to the elbow. "Bring the candles nearer," Dr. Fenn said. They brought the candles nearer. He bent over the bed. He looked from a distance of perhaps 2 feet at the right thigh, which had by now swollen to something close to twice the girth of the left, and at the foot, which was still turned out, and at the boy's face, which had gone from skimmed milk to something grayer. He did not touch him. "Fracture of the femur," he said. "Midshaft from the look of the deformity, considerable displacement." He straightened up. "Where is Mr. Coles?" "Sent for, sir," said Mrs. Russolme. "To Ashford. When?" "4:30. Dr. Fenn took out his watch, looked at it and put it back, and something in the way he did it made Ruth Ardern's stomach turn over. "Then he has been sent for an hour," he said, "and he is not here." Mr. Coles was not there, because Mr. Coles was at that moment 14 miles away, on the far side of Monsell Head at a lying-in that had gone wrong in the way that lying-ins went wrong in 1816, and he would not leave it. And no reasonable man would have asked him to, and he did not reach Wrenfield until 9 o'clock the following morning. Nobody in the blue bedchamber knew that. What they knew was that the surgeon had been sent for and had not come. "Sir?" Ruth said. Dr. Fenn turned. He had not, until that moment, established what she was, and he looked at her dress, and her hands, and her position by the head of the bed, and arrived, correctly, at Governess, and adjusted his manner accordingly, which is to say, he became slightly kinder and very much less attentive. "Yes, his foot is cold. He has had a severe shock. The extremities will be cold. It is colder than the other one, sir. It has been getting colder since we brought him in. And the beat behind the ankle bone is faster than it was at 4 o'clock. and it is harder to find. There was a pause in which Dr. Aubrey Fenn looked at the governess with an expression of mild and entirely genuine surprise. "You have been counting his pulse," he said. "Yes, sir." "At the ankle?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" And Ruth Ardern, standing in a nobleman's bedchamber in a stuff gown with £35 a year, and no family and no character but the one Wrenfield had given her, made the first of the 3 decisions that ruined and remade her life, and made it in about a second and a half. "Because when the bone is displaced far enough, it can press the vessel," she said. "And if the vessel is pressed long enough, the leg dies below it. And you cannot tell by looking, sir, because a thigh that sighs looks the same either way. You can only tell by the ankle, and by the cold, and by how long it takes the color to come back into the nail bed when you press it and let go." The room went entirely quiet. Dr. Fenn set his hat down on the chest of drawers. "Who," he said, "are you? If this is already tightening your chest, go ahead and hit subscribe now, because I promise you this story is going somewhere, and it is not going where the first 10 minutes suggest. Her father was Josiah Ardern, and he had set bones in a stone house outside Whitworth in Lancashire for 31 years, as his father had before him and his grandfather before that. There is no polite word for what the Arderns were. The medical profession called them quacks and empirics and the ignorant vulgar, and said so in print, repeatedly, for 100 years. The people who came to them called them bonesetters, and came from 40 and 60 and 100 miles, on carts and on foot, and once, famously in that district, carried the last 9 miles in a chair by 4 brothers. And the reason they came is not complicated, and was never really disputed by anybody who was actually paying attention. The bonesetters were, at that one narrow thing, extremely good. They had no theory. That was precisely the objection to them, and precisely the source of their skill. They could not tell you why a joint went back, or what the humors were doing. They had simply, each of them, handled several thousand limbs by the age of 25, under the eye of a parent who had handled several thousand more. And the knowledge had come down through the hands, without ever passing through a book. In Lancashire, the tailors of Whitworth had built a practice so large that gentlemen came up from London to it, and were treated in the order they arrived in, behind colliers and weavers, which was one of the several things the royal colleges found intolerable about them. Ruth had been the 4th child, and the only one with the hands. Her father had noticed it when she was 7, and had not, to his very great credit, and to her very great cost, pretended otherwise. From 7 to 16, she had stood at his elbow in that stone room, while men came in from the quarries, and the mills with shoulders out, and wrists broken, and fingers crushed, and she had learned by the only method there has ever been for that particular knowledge, which is touch. 10,000 times, corrected. At 16 it stopped. It stopped because Josiah Ardern died, in the space of 4 days, of an infection in his own hand that he had taken from a wound he was cleaning. Which is an irony that his daughter never once in her life found funny, and it stopped because a bonesetter's practice cannot pass to a daughter. It could pass to a son, and did, all over the north, for generations. A woman of 16, who announced that she would carry on her father's work, would have been laughed at by the parish, refused by every patient with money, and, if she had continued, would very shortly have found herself before a magistrate on a charge that some clever attorney would have had no trouble constructing. So the practice went to a cousin who had 2/3 of her ability and all of her father's name, and Ruth Ardern was sent to an aunt in Chesterfield, who put her to a school for 2 years to make her respectable. And at 18, she went out as a governess, which was the one occupation open to an educated woman with no money, and she had been one ever since, in 4 houses, for 9 years, teaching French and the globes, and a little arithmetic to other people's children. She had not set a bone in 11 years. She had not told anybody, in any of those 4 houses, that she had ever set one, because a governess with a past in a stone room in Whitworth is not a governess. She is a curiosity at best, and a fraud at worst, and Ruth Ardern had understood at 18, with total clarity, that the single most valuable thing she owned was the absence of a story about her. "I am Miss Ardern, sir," she said. "I am the governess here. My father was a bonesetter in Lancashire, and I stood at his elbow from the age of 7 until he died." Dr. Aubrey Fenn's face did something that Mrs. Roussolme, watching from the door, described 11 years later as the look of a man who has bitten into an apple and found half of something in it. "A bonesetter," he said. "Yes, sir." "In Lancashire?" "Yes, sir." "You are aware," Dr. Fenn said, and his voice had gone very pleasant, "that the persons you are describing kill and cripple a considerable number of people every year, and that the reason they are not prosecuted more frequently is that their patients are too poor and too ignorant to complain." "Some of them do, sir." "Yes, some of them. There are bad ones," Ruth said. "There are a great many bad ones, and the bad ones do exactly what you say, and I have seen the results of it. I am not asking you to have an opinion about bonesetters. I am telling you that the boy's foot is cold and getting colder, and that if it is still like this in 3 hours, it will not matter what anybody's opinion is." "And what," said Dr. Fenn, "would you have me do about it?" And there in one sentence, in a warm bedchamber in Derbyshire with the candles going, was the entire architecture of English medicine in 1816, and neither of them said it out loud, because both of them already knew it. He could not do anything about it. Could not in the sense of being unwilling. Could not in the sense that if Aubrey Fenn, licentiate of the Royal College of Physicians, had put his hands under that thigh and pulled, he would have performed a manual operation, and a physician who performs manual operations is not a physician. He would have been reportable to his college. He would have been, in the language of the profession, and in the eyes of every colleague he had, no longer a gentleman practicing physic, but a man doing a surgeon's work, without a surgeon's qualification, and the fact that he could very likely have done it competently was entirely beside the point, and always had been. The system was not designed to keep the physician from helping. It was designed to keep the physician clean. "I will prescribe," Dr. Fenn said. "Laudanum, 20 drops, repeated at need. He is to be kept warm and absolutely still. Nothing whatever is to be done to the limb until Mr. Coles arrives, and when Mr. Coles arrives, he will reduce the fracture and apply the splints. And I have no doubt at all that the boy will do very well. And if Mr. Coles does not come until tomorrow—" "Then we shall wait until tomorrow, Miss Ardern," said Dr. Fenn, "because that is what is done." He wrote the prescription. He drank a glass of Madeira in the small parlour. He said, at the door, that he would return in the morning, and that he was sure there was no immediate danger, and that the young were remarkably resilient, and he got into his carriage at 7:10 and went back to Bakewell. He was not a monster. This is the part that people find hardest, and it is the part that is true. He was a competent, conventional, adequately kind professional man who did exactly what his training, his college, his profession, and every single one of his colleagues would have told him to do, and he did it in the sincere belief that he was protecting the child from a governess with a folk remedy and a high opinion of herself. He simply, in the whole of a 53-year life, had never once been in a position where the correct thing and the permitted thing came apart. And so he had never found out which of the two he actually believed in. Ruth Ardern found out at 8:30 that night. The Duke of Wrenfield was still not home. The message had reached Chatsworth at 6. The horses had been put to at past, and the road over the tops between Chatsworth and Wrenfield had 1.5 miles of black ice on it that night that turned a 50-minute drive into 3 hours. Mrs. Rusholme was in the blue bedchamber. Dorcas, the nursery maid, 17, was in the blue bedchamber. Ruth Ardern was in the blue bedchamber. Between them they had, in law and in the eyes of the world, exactly no authority of any kind over anything. At 8 o'clock, Ruth pressed the nail of Tom's right great toe and let it go and counted. She had done it at 5, and it had come back in about 2 seconds. At 7, it had taken 3. At 8, she counted to 5 before the colour came back into the nail bed, and the skin over the top of the foot when she laid 2 fingers on it, and then laid 2 fingers of the other hand on the left foot to compare, was not merely cool. It was a different substance. At 8:30, she could not find the beat behind the ankle bone at all. She looked for it for 90 seconds. She moved her fingers 1/4 of an inch at a time. Along the hollow, between the bone and the tendon, both sides, 3 times over, with the candle held down close by Dorcas, and there was nothing there. She sat back on her heels. Mrs. Rusholme said, "Miss Ardern." "Yes. What is it?" And Ruth Ardern said, in a voice that she was surprised to find perfectly steady, "It is that in about 4 hours the surgeon will not be able to save his leg, and in about 8 he will not be able to save him, and there is not going to be a surgeon." Nobody said anything. "Mrs. Rusholme," Ruth said, "I need to say this once, properly, and then I need you to decide, because you have been in this house for 34 years, and I have been in it for 2, and whatever happens after tonight is going to happen to you as well. Say it. The bone is displaced across the vessel. I can feel the end of it. I could feel it at 4 o'clock, and I have been hoping I was wrong for 4.5 hours, and I am not wrong. If it is pulled straight, the pressure comes off, and either the vessel opens again, or it does not, and I will know inside 2 minutes which it is. If it is not pulled straight tonight, it will not matter what Mr. Coles does at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, because by then the leg will be gone, and he will take it off at the hip, and a boy of 9 does not often survive having a leg taken off at the hip in a house. Can you do it? I do not know. That is not an answer. It is the only honest one you are going to get." Ruth stood up. Her hands, she noticed with detached interest, had begun to shake, and she put them behind her back. "I have done 9 of these. Not one of them since I was 16 years old. Every one of them was a grown man, and every one of them was done by my father with me under his hands, and the last 3 he let me lead, and stood behind me with his hands over mine, which is not the same thing as doing it alone in a room where everyone is frightened of me. A thigh is the worst one. It is the biggest muscle in the body, and it is pulling those ends past each other with about the force of a strong man, and you cannot ask it politely. It takes 2 people, and it takes several minutes, and it hurts more than anything that will ever happen to him. And if you do nothing, then I have done nothing," Ruth said, "which is permitted, and which everyone will agree was correct, and he will very probably die of it, and I will still be a governess in the morning." Mrs. Rusholme looked at the boy on the bed for a long moment. Then she said, "Dorcas, go and lock the passage door at the top of the stairs, and bring me the key, and then come back in here, and do not open your mouth about this to anybody living, for as long as you draw breath." Dorcas went. "Mrs. Rusholme," Ruth said, "you understand what you are doing." "I understand exactly what I am doing," said Mrs. Rusholme. "I am 48 years old, and I have buried a husband and 2 children, and I have carried that boy's father about this house on my hip when he was smaller than that, and I am not going to stand in a doorway a second time and watch an Ellery die because a gentleman went home to his dinner. She rolled her sleeves. "Tell me what you want." What Ruth wanted took 11 minutes to assemble, and it was, every item of it, ordinary. She wanted the 2 long boards from the back of the linen press, which were sycamore and about 4 feet, and she wanted them wrapped in 3 thicknesses of flannel. She wanted every strip of clean linen in the house torn to 4 inches. She wanted a pillow, 2 bolsters, a bowl of hot water, soap, and the small, sharp scissors from the still room, and she wanted the boy's boot and his breeches cut off rather than pulled off. She wanted the laudanum that Dr. Fenn had prescribed, and she gave him 25 drops rather than 20, and she wrote the number down on a slip of paper in her own hand at the time, which was the single most intelligent thing she did that night, and which saved her afterwards. And she wanted the strongest person in the house, who was not Mrs. Russholmer and was not Dorcas. It was a woman named Alice Gorst, who was 30 and did the laundry at Wrenfield and had forearms like a farrier, and who came up the back stairs in her apron, was told in 9 sentences what was being asked of her, said right, and asked no further questions at any point that night or afterwards. Ruth washed to the elbow. Then she knelt on the bed beside a sleeping 9-year-old boy with her hands above his thigh and did not put them down. And Mrs. Russholm said quietly, "Miss Ardern, a moment." "Miss Ardern, if you are going to do it, I know." "Then what is the matter?" And Ruth Ardern said the truest thing she said that whole night, which was, "I am trying to remember whether I actually know how to do this, or whether I only remember watching my father know." Nobody answered her. After about 10 seconds, she put her hands down onto the swollen thigh, and the 11 years came off her like a coat. It is not a mystical thing. It has never been a mystical thing, whatever the pamphlet said in either direction. What her hands knew, and what no amount of reading had ever given anybody, was the specific feel of 2 ends of a femur, which is unlike anything else in the body, and the direction the upper one goes when the great muscle at the front pulls it, which is up and out always, in every human being who has ever lived. She found the upper end through 4 inches of swelling in about 15 seconds, because she had been taught to find it not by looking for the bone, but by feeling for the place where the muscle changed its mind. "Alice, sit there. Both hands round his hips, above the bone you can feel at the front, and lean back until I tell you to stop, not pull. Lean. You are an anchor. You are not a rope. Right. Mrs. Russholm, hold his shoulders and his head and talk to him. It does not matter what you say. Keep saying it. And you?" "I am the rope," said Ruth Ardern. She took the leg above the knee in both hands, and she began to pull. It took 4 minutes and 11 seconds, and it was the worst 4 minutes of every life in that room. Reduction of a displaced fracture of the femur is not a wrench, and it is not a snap, and there is no moment where anything goes click, and every account you have ever heard that says otherwise was written by somebody who was not there. It is a slow, steady, unbelievably heavy pull, applied along the line of the bone and held against a muscle that has spent 5 hours shortening and does not intend to stop until the muscle gives up. You cannot beat it with strength. You beat it with patience, and the patience has to be maintained through the sound the patient makes. Tom Ellery woke up somewhere in the 2nd minute, laudanum or no laudanum, and screamed. Alice Gorst leaned back against a bedpost, with both hands locked round the boy's hips, and did not move an inch, and did not make a sound, and was afterwards found to have taken the skin off 3 knuckles against the bed frame. Mrs. Rusham held his shoulders and put her face down beside his ear, and said, over and over, in the flat Derbyshire voice she had used on his father 30 years before, that he was a good lad, that she had him, that it was nearly done, that he was a good lad, that she had him. She said it about 200 times, She could not afterwards remember any of it, and Ruth Ardern pulled and counted and did not let go, and at 3 minutes and something she felt the whole limb lengthen under her hands, in one long slow yielding, an inch, and then most of another, and the shape of the thigh changed under the swelling, and she brought the leg in and rotated the foot back to where a foot belongs, and it went. Hold him. Hold him. Do not let him twist. She put 2 fingers behind the ankle bone. There was nothing. She moved them 1/4 of an inch. Nothing. She moved them again. Somebody in that room, and none of the 3 of them ever admitted which, made a small sound. And then it came up under her fingers, thin and much too fast and absolutely unmistakable, and Ruth Ardern put her forehead down on the bed cover beside a 9-year-old boy's knee for about 3 seconds, which was the only time she came apart that night. "It is there," she said. The splinting took another 40 minutes and was, in its way, the more skilled half of the work. A reduced femur that is not held will displace again inside an hour because the muscle has not agreed to anything. It has merely been outlasted. She padded the sycamore boards with flannel, set one along the outside of the leg from the armpit to below the heel and one along the inside from the groin down, and bound them with torn linen at 9 points, not tight, never tight, because a bandage that stops the blood is a bone setter killing a patient slowly, instead of a surgeon killing him fast. She built a bank of bolsters under the knee to keep a slight bend in it. She tied the 2 ankles loosely together so that the good leg would splint the bad one if he moved in the night. And every 20 minutes until 4 in the morning, she put 2 fingers behind the ankle bone and pressed the nail of the great toe and counted the color back, and wrote the numbers down on a sheet of paper, in a column with the times beside them. That column of figures is the reason this story does not end the way it very easily could have. The Duke of Wrenfield got home at 11 minutes to 11. He came up the stairs 3 at a time in a wet greatcoat, and found the passage door at the top locked, and stood there for a moment with his hand on it, and then hit it once with the flat of his hand, hard enough to be heard in the kitchens. Dorcas opened it. What Marcus Ellery saw when he came into the blue bedchamber was this: his brother's son, asleep, grey, with a lamp beside him. 2 boards down the length of his right leg, his housekeeper sitting on a hard chair with her sleeves rolled and her hands in her lap, shaking. The laundry-maid, standing by the window with her knuckles wrapped in a handkerchief, and his governess, kneeling on the floor at the foot of the bed, with her hair down and blood on her cuff that was not hers, writing numbers in a column by candlelight. He said, "Where is Fenn?" "Gone home to Bakewell, your grace," said Mrs. Rusholme, "at 7:10, and coals." Not come. The Duke looked at the boards on the leg. "Who did that?" he said. And here is where the story could have gone the ordinary way, and did not. Ruth Ardern got to her feet, because you do not answer a duke from the floor, and she said, "I did, your grace." She did not explain. She did not say who her father was, or that the surgeon had not come, or that she had counted the pulse 11 times, or that the housekeeper had locked the door, or any of the 9 perfectly true things that would have made it survivable. She had decided somewhere in the 4th minute of that pull that if she was going to be destroyed for this, she was not going to spend the rest of her life having been a woman who tried to talk her way out of it. "I did it, your grace," she said. "Nobody instructed me. Mrs. Rusholme and the others did what I told them because I told them I knew how. If it was wrong, it was mine." The Duke of Wrenfield stood in the middle of the room for what Dorcas afterwards swore was a full half-minute. Then he walked to the bed and sat down on the edge of it very carefully so as not to shift the mattress, and picked up his nephew's left hand and held it and looked at nothing at all for a while. "Is he going to live?" he said. "I think so." Is he going to walk? I think so. Not for 3 months, and he will very likely be a little short on that side for the rest of his life, and there is nothing anybody can do about that, including a surgeon. Ruth's voice was steady, and she was concentrating hard on keeping it that way. Your Grace, at 8:30 tonight, I could not find the pulse in his foot. I can find it now. That is the whole of what I have to tell you, and it is the only part that matters. Marcus Ellery did not look up. Say that again, he said. At 8:30, there was no beat behind the ankle bone. There is one now. And the difference between those two things is the boards. The difference between those two things is that the bone is no longer lying across the vessel. The boards are only to keep it where it is. He nodded slowly, once, still looking at his nephew's hand. Miss Ardern, he said, go to bed. I would rather sit up, Your Grace. It wants checking every 20 minutes until morning, and I am the only person in this house who knows what checking it means. Then teach somebody, and sit up until you have, and then go to bed. He did look up then. That is not a kindness. You have been on your knees on a stone floor and a bed since 4 o'clock, and you are going to be asked to account for tonight by 3 separate people before noon tomorrow, and I want you able to think when they do. If you have made it this far, and you already know exactly what is coming for her in the morning, take a breath and go ahead and subscribe. What happens at Wrenfield over the next 11 days is the whole reason I wanted to tell this one. Mr. Coles arrived at 9:03 the next morning, unshaven, having been awake for 29 hours, with a lying-in behind him that had gone as well as those things ever went, which is to say the mother had lived. He was 41. He had been apprenticed at 15, had walked the wards at Bart's for 2 years, was a member of the Royal College of Surgeons, and had set, by his own rough estimate, somewhere over 400 fractures in 19 years of country practice, most of them on quarrymen and colliers, and one memorably on a bishop. He came into the blue bedchamber, put his bag down, and stopped. Then he crouched by the bed and looked at the splinting for about 90 seconds without touching it. Who padded these boards? He said. I did, sir, said Ruth. 3 thicknesses? Yes, sir. Why not 2? Derbyshire. Because the boy is thin, and it is going to be 3 months, and the flannel packs down. 2 would have been bone on board by the 3rd week, at the heel and the ankle. Mr. Coles looked round at her. Where are the ties? 9 points, sir. None of them over the fracture site itself, and they are set loose. I have been putting a finger under each of them every 2 hours, and the bolsters under the knee, to keep about 15 degrees in it. My father held that a leg, splinted dead straight aches worse, and the patient fights it, and a patient who fights it displaces. Mr. Coles stood up and turned round properly and looked at a governess in a stuff gown who had been awake for 27 hours. Your father, he said, Josiah Ardern, Whitworth in Lancashire. There was a pause. I have heard of the Whitworth men, said Mr. Coles. Most people in the trade have, sir. I have heard of them, Mr. Coles said, mostly from men who had never been within 100 miles of Lancashire and had a very great deal to say about it. He bent down again and put his own hands on the splints, testing, running 2 fingers under the ties, one at a time, exactly as she had described. And then he did the thing that decided everything, which was that he took hold of the boy's right foot and pressed the nail of the great toe and let it go and counted under his breath. 2, he said. It was 5 at 8 o'clock last night, sir, and nothing behind the ankle at 50:30. You have it written down. Ruth gave him the sheet of paper. Mr. Coles read a column of 31 entries, times and findings, in a clear small hand, from 4 in the afternoon to 7 in the morning. He read it twice. Miss Ardern, he said, I am going to ask you a question, and I would like you to understand before you answer it that I am not laying a trap. If this leg had not been pulled straight until I got here at 9 o'clock this morning, what is your opinion? That you would have taken it off at the hip by this afternoon, sir, and that he would have died of it inside a week. Yes, said Mr. Coles. That is my opinion too. Dr. Aubrey Fenn arrived at 10:30. He came into the blue bedchamber, saw the boards, and went white. And then he saw Mr. Coles standing beside them, and the colour came back into his face all at once. Coles, thank God. I trust you have undone this. Undone what, sir? That. Dr. Fenn's hand indicated the leg without going near it. That woman put her hands on him. I gave the most explicit instructions that nothing whatever was to be done to the limb. You did, said Mr. Coles, and I have looked at what was done, and it is a mid-shaft femur reduced and splintered, and I have handled about 400 of them, and I would be content to have my own name on it. The room stopped. You cannot be serious. I am entirely serious. She is a governess. She is a bonesetter's daughter out of Whitworth, Mr. Coles said, and I am a surgeon out of an apprenticeship in Chesterfield, and there is not one of my fellows in London who would let either of us through his front door. So I am not going to stand in a sick room and tell a woman she was wrong when she was right. The pulse was gone at 8:30. It is there now. Those are the facts of it, and everything else is a question of who is permitted to have done it. That, said Dr. Fenn, and his voice had begun to shake, is precisely what it is a question of. I know, said Mr. Coles. That is what I said. There is a version of this story in which that is the end, and it is a nice version, and it is not true. What actually happened next is that Dr. Aubrey Fenn went home to Bakewell, and, over the following 4 days, did 3 things, none of which were illegal, and all of which were, in the England of 1816, entirely effective. He wrote to the Duke of Wrenfield a long, courteous, deeply concerned letter, setting out his professional view that an unqualified female servant had performed a manual operation on the heir. To a dukedom against explicit medical instruction that the outcome was as yet unknown, that he could not be answerable for the case if she remained in the house, and that he felt bound in conscience to record his objection. He mentioned the matter, in confidence, to 4 people, and he told his own account of the night to the Dowager Duchess of Wrenfield, Lady Sybil Ellery, who was 67, who lived 9 miles away at the dower house at Harrop, who had buried 1 son and 1 daughter-in-law, and who regarded the survival of Thomas Ellery as the single remaining purpose of her existence. Lady Sybil's carriage came up the Wrenfield Drive on the 16th of February. She did not go up to the boy first, which everybody noticed. She went into the library and sent for her son and closed the door. And what was said in there was not overheard by anybody, and the general shape of it became perfectly clear within the hour, because Lady Sybil came out and asked, in the hall, in front of Sour Derbyshire equivalent, and 2 footmen, to have Miss Ardern brought to her. Ruth came down. She had slept 11 hours in 5 days. She had not been dismissed, and she had not been told she would not be dismissed, and she had spent 4 days in a house where every servant she passed either would not meet her eye or looked at her with an expression she found considerably harder to bear, which was awe. "You are the governess," said Lady Sybil. "Yes, ma'am. You laid hands on my grandson." "Yes, ma'am," against the instruction of a physician. "Yes, ma'am. Do you know," she said, "what happens to this family if that child dies?" "Yes, ma'am." "Tell me." "The title goes to a cousin in Northumberland, ma'am, whom nobody here has met. Your son loses his brother's son, and you lose the last of them." Something went across Lady Sybil's face. "And knowing that," she said, "you took hold of him. Yes, ma'am. Why? And Ruth Ardern, who had been braced for 4 days for a great many questions, and had never once anticipated that one, found that she had no prepared answer, and had to say the actual thing. Because there was nobody else in the room who could, she said. And I could not think of a single reason that would have been good enough to tell him afterwards. Not to him, ma'am. To myself. I could not think of anything I would have been able to say to myself for the rest of my life about why I stood in that room with my hands behind my back. Lady Sybil Ellery was quiet for a moment. Dr. Fenn, she said, informs me that you are a bonesetter. My father was, ma'am. He informs me that such persons are dangerous, ignorant frauds who cripple the poor for money. Some of them are, ma'am. He informs me, said Lady Sybil, in the same letter, that he did not himself examine the limb by touch at any point on the evening of the 11th, because it would not have been proper for him to do so. There was a very long silence in the hall at Wrenfield. He does not appear to have noticed, the Dowager Duchess said, that he had written both of those sentences on the same sheet of paper. She turned and went up the stairs to see her grandson, and stopped halfway and said, without looking back, Miss Ardern, come up in 10 minutes and explain those boards to me. I do not intend to be the only person in this family who does not understand what is holding my grandson together. The immediate danger to Ruth Ardern was never really the Duke. And it was never really the Dowager. It was the practice of medicine. And it was structural. And it did not care what anybody at Wrenfield thought. The Apothecaries Act had received the royal assent 7 months earlier, in July of 1815, and had come into force on the 1st of August, and it was the first statute in English history to make it an offence to practice a branch of medicine without a license. It was aimed at apothecaries, and it required apprenticeship and examination by the Society of Apothecaries, and it was in February of 1816, the newest and most talked about thing in the profession, and every medical man in England was at that moment in the middle of working out what it meant. It did not, on any reading, make what Ruth Ardern did a crime. Bone-setting sat in a gap as it had sat for 200 years, and the Act did not name it. But the gap was closing. Everybody could feel it closing, and a physician of standing who chose to make a noise about an unlicensed woman performing a manual operation in a nobleman's house in the first year of the first act was choosing an extremely good moment to make it. Mr. Coles explained this to the Duke of Wrenfield in the estate office on the 18th of February, in about 4 minutes, in the flat way of a man who has thought about it in the saddle. He cannot have her prosecuted, Your Grace. There is nothing to prosecute her under. What he can do is a great deal worse than that, which is, he can talk. He is talking already. If he chooses, by summer, there will not be a family in 3 counties that would take her as a governess, and she will not be able to say why, because the thing she will be refused for is the thing everybody will have agreed not to write down. Mr. Coles turned his hat over in his hands, and I will tell you the rest of it, because you will hear it from somebody less friendly. If he pushes it, it will not stop at her. It will be said that the Duke of Wrenfield permitted an unqualified female to operate upon his heir, and then kept her in the house. And that will not be said about her, Your Grace. That will be said about you. Marcus Ellery stood at the window of the estate office for a while. Mr. Coles, he said, what did it cost you to say what you said in that bedchamber on Monday morning? I have not the least idea yet, Your Grace. But you knew there would be a bill. I knew there would be a bill. And you said it anyway. I said it, said Mr. Coles, because it was true, and because I have spent 19 years being called Mr. by men who could not set a wrist. And I find at 41 that I have run out of patience with the entire arrangement. That is not a noble reason. It is mostly temper. The Duke of Wrenfield laughed, once, without much humor. Temper, he said, seems to be the only thing in this county that has been of the slightest use this week. If you have come this far, you already know she is not going to be allowed to simply be thanked. So go ahead and subscribe, because the last part of this is the part I actually wanted to tell you. What the Duke of Wrenfield did about Dr. Aubrey Fenn was nothing at all. And it took him 9 days to work out that nothing was the correct answer. He had wanted to do a very great deal. There were perhaps 4 men in Derbyshire. He could not have finished inside a fortnight. And Aubrey Fenn was emphatically one of the 400 he could. Mr. Coles talked him out of it in the estate office on the 27th of February, and he did it with one question. Your Grace, when you have ruined him, what have you proved? That he was wrong. No, said Coles. You will have proved that a duke can ruin a physician, which every man in this county already believes, and which is the reason half of them will side with him. If you break Fenn, Miss Ardern becomes the woman a great nobleman destroyed a doctor over. She will never be anything else again as long as she lives, and neither will you, and neither will the boy. Then what? Let him say it, Mr. Coles said. Let him say all of it, as loudly as he likes, for as long as he likes, and then in 3 months put the boy on a horse. The Duke of Wrenfield looked at him for a moment. That is a very long time to do nothing, he said. It is 11 weeks, said Coles. It is the exact length of a femur. Tom Ellery lay on his back in the blue bedchamber for 11 weeks. That is the part of this story that a novel would skip, and that anybody who has actually broken a thigh will tell you is the whole of it. There was no drama in it after the 11th of February. There was one small boy, flat, in a hot room, in February and March and April of 1816, with 2 sycamore boards on his leg, bored out of his mind, being turned every 4 hours by 2 women so that his back did not break down, and having his ties checked and loosened and retied every day for 77 days. He got a fever in the 3rd week that frightened everybody for 4 days and turned out to be nothing but a cold. He learned, because there was nothing else on earth to do, an enormous amount of French, and Ruth Ardern sat in that room and taught him, and read to him, and turned him, and checked the ties, and measured once a week with a knotted string, from the point of his hip to the inner side of his knee on both sides, and wrote the 2 numbers in a column, and watched the difference between them, narrow from 1 3/4 inches in February to 5/8 of an inch in April, because a growing bone remodels, and a child of 9 is not a man of 40, and time does about half the work if somebody has held the ends in the right place while it does. Dr. Fenn talked. He talked in Bakewell, and in Matlock, and in Chesterfield, and by the middle of March, the story in 3 counties was that the Duke of Wrenfield's heir had been mauled by a female quack, and that nobody could get her. Straight answer out of Wrenfield about it, and there was a version circulating by April in which the boy had lost the leg altogether, and it was being kept quiet. Mr. Coles, who heard all of it, said nothing, and went on with his rounds. On the 12th of May, 1816, the Duke of Wrenfield gave a dinner for 31 people. It was, by the standards of the county, unremarkable. Dr. Aubrey Fenn was invited, and came because a physician in practice who declines a duke's invitation has resigned. Mr. Coles was invited, and came, and was seated a very long way up the table from where a surgeon would ordinarily have been put, which 2 people noticed at the time and 11 remembered afterwards. At about 9:30, when the company had come through into the long drawing-room, Thomas Ellery came down the main staircase at Wrenfield on his own 2 legs, in a coat that had been let out because he had grown 2 inches lying down, and crossed the room and shook hands with his grandmother. He limped. He limped noticeably, and he limped for the rest of his life, and the difference was a little over half an inch, and never entirely went away. He walked the length of that room in front of 31 people, and there was not one person in it who did not know exactly what they were being shown. Nobody made a speech. That was the thing that Mrs. Rucholmer said. 20 years later, she admired most about the whole evening. There was no announcement, no explanation, no toast. There was a boy walking across a carpet in May, who in February had had no pulse in his foot, and the county was left to do its own arithmetic. Dr. Fenn left at 10:20. He did not stop practicing, and he was not ruined, and he lived another 11 years in Bakewell, and attended a great many people and did them, on the whole, a good deal more good than harm. He never again mentioned the events of February 1816 to anybody, and when the story came up in his hearing, which for a while it did, he was observed to change the subject with a certain amount of energy. The one thing he did do, and it is on record, because he wrote it in a letter to a colleague in Derby in 1819 that survived in a bundle of papers sold at auction in the 1890s, was this: I have latterly come round to the view that our division of labour, however necessary to the dignity of the profession, is capable of producing situations in which the practitioner best able to relieve the patient is the one least permitted to attempt it. I do not know what is to be done about this. I state it only as a thing I have observed. That is as close as Aubrey Fenn ever came, and it is more than most men manage. The Duke of Wrenfield asked Ruth Ardern to marry him on the 4th of June in the paddock, which was not romantic and was entirely deliberate, because it was the field where it had happened, and because he had worked out by then that she distrusted every room in that house that had a door he could close. She said no. She said it immediately, before he had finished, which he told her afterwards was the single most humiliating 90 seconds of his adult life, and which she told him afterwards was the kindest thing she had ever done for anybody, because a slow no would have let him hope. Will you tell me why? He said. Or am I to guess for the rest of my life? I will tell you why. Sit down on that rail, because it is going to take a minute and I cannot say it looking up at you. She waited until he had. Your Grace, if I marry you, I become a duchess. That is generally how it works. Then tell me what a duchess does when a boy comes off a horse. He opened his mouth, and then he did not say anything. She sends for the surgeon, Ruth said. That is what she does. That is the only thing she is permitted to do. And she is permitted rather less than a governess, not more, because a governess who kneels down in the mud is an eccentric, and a duchess who kneels down in the mud is a scandal that follows her husband into the Lords. You have watched me for 4 months. You know exactly what happens to me inside 2 years of putting on that title. And it is not that I would be unhappy. I would be extremely comfortable. It is that the next time it happens, in some other paddock to some other child, I would stand there with my hands behind my back and send for the surgeon, and I would be right to, and I would have to live in the house afterwards. Marcus Ellery sat on the paddock rail for a while. Miss Ardens, he said, what do you actually want? Not what you will accept. What do you want? I want to teach it, she said, and she said it so fast and so completely without hesitation that it was obvious she had been holding it for months. I cannot practice. I have known that since I was 16, and I have made my peace with it, and I am not asking you to change England, because you cannot, and neither can I. But there is nobody teaching this. Mr. Coles has 2 apprentices, and he was never taught to reduce a femur by anybody. He worked it out on quarrymen over 19 years. And about 1/3 of what he does wrong and does not know it, and he would be the first to say so. My father had 31 years of it in his hands, and it went into the ground with him. except for the part he got into me, and that will go into the ground with me. There is no book. There has never been a book. It is the one kind of knowledge in England that has never once been written down, because the people who had it could not write, and the people who could write despised them. And if there were a book, there cannot be a book, Ruth said. That is the whole point of it. You cannot learn this from a page any more than you can learn to swim from one. It has to go through hands, which is why it has to be taught in a room to people who are going to be allowed to use it, and I am not allowed to use it, and they are. Marcus Ellery began, slowly, to smile. So what you want, he said, is Mr. Coles's apprentices. I want Mr. Coles's apprentices, and the two that Mr. Ryder has at Matlock, and I want them for 1 day, a fortnight, for as long as it takes. And I want somebody to pay Mr. Coles for the day, so he does not lose by it. And I want it never once to be written down anywhere that a woman did it, because the moment it is written down, the college will find a way to stop it. And in exchange for all this, said the Duke of Wrenfield, what do I get? Nothing whatever, said Ruth Ardern. That is why I said no. They were married on the 9th of September, 1816, and if you want to know what changed between the 4th of June and the 9th of September, it was this. It was not a grand gesture. He did not endow a hospital, and he did not make a speech in the Lords, and he did not fight the Royal College of Physicians, all three of which he considered, and all three of which Mr. Coles talked him out of on the same grounds as before. What he did was buy a house. It was a stone house on the edge of Bakewell, with a large, low room at the back that had been a wheelwright's shop, and it cost him £480, and he put it in Mr. Coles's name, because a house in Mr. Coles's name was a surgeon's premises, and a house in his own would have been a duke meddling in medicine. And then he went to Ruth Ardern in the schoolroom at Wrenfield, and put the conveyance on the table, and said, the room at the back is 31 feet by 18. Coles says he can get you 6 of them on a Thursday. He also says, and I am quoting him exactly, that if you tell anybody it was his idea, he will deny it under oath. Ruth looked at the paper for a long time. This does not solve it, she said. You understand that. In 10 years I will still not be permitted to touch anybody, and if it goes well, there will be men in Derbyshire setting bones better than they were. And every single one of them will have been taught by nobody, officially, and my name will not be on any part of it. I know. It is not justice, no, said Marcus Ellery. It is 31 feet by 18. It is the largest thing I could find that I could actually do. He put his hands in his pockets. I have spent 4 months discovering that a duke can do almost nothing at all, which has been extremely good for my character, and which I have not enjoyed 1 minute of. I cannot make the college let you in. I cannot make Fen honest. I cannot even make the county stop saying that my nephew lost his leg. What I can do is buy a room and pay a surgeon for a Thursday, and then get out of the way, and I have decided that a man who does the one thing available to him is not doing nothing. Ruth Ardern put her hand flat on the conveyance. Ask me again, she said. The room at the back of the house in Bakewell ran for 22 years, 6 apprentices on the first Thursday in October 1816. 11 by 1820. It never had a name and it never had a sign, and there is no record of it anywhere in the archives of any medical body in Great Britain, which was the entire design, and it survives in the historical record for exactly one reason, which is that surgeons keep notebooks. There are 4 of those notebooks in existence. 2 are in a county archive, 1 is in a medical school collection, and 1 is in private hands. All 4 are the working notebooks of Derbyshire surgeons who trained between 1816 and 1838, and all 4 contain, in among the sketches of instruments and the lists of fees and the recipes for dressings, A set of pages on the reduction of fractures that are unlike anything else in the surgical literature of that period. They do not describe technique in the usual way. They describe what things feel like. The upper part goes up and out always. Do not hunt for it. Find where the great muscle changes its mind, and it will be under your hand. You cannot beat the muscle. Wait for it. Count. It will let go between 3 and 5 minutes and not before, and if you snatch, you will do it twice. 2 fingers behind the ankle bone before you begin, and after you finish, and every 20 minutes between. Write the times in a column. A column will tell you what your memory will not. 3 thicknesses of flannel, not 2, if it is to be a long one. You are the rope. Somebody else is the anchor. Do not try to be both. None of the 4 notebooks says where any of this came from. 3 of them do not name a source at all. The 4th, which belonged to a surgeon named Josiah Byrom, who practiced in Chesterfield from 1824 until his death in 1871, has a single line at the top of the first of those pages, written in a young man's hand, and evidently at the time. From the Thursday room, she says the counting is the whole of it. Thomas Ellery, 9th Duke of Wrenfield, lived to be 74. He limped all his life. He sat in the House of Lords for 41 years and spoke in it 11 times. 9 of those 11 speeches were about the regulation and the training of medical practitioners. He spoke in favor of the Medical Act of 1858, which finally created a single register and finally required that every man calling himself a doctor be able to prove what he had actually been taught, 36 years after the Thursday room in Bakewell had closed and 19 years after the woman who ran it had died. He never mentioned her in the house. He was asked once, at a dinner in 1861, by a young man who did not know any better, why a man of his position had spent 4 decades on so unglamorous a subject. And the 9th Duke of Wrenfield, who was 54 years old, and had a leg half an inch short, and had been walking on it since he was 9, is reported to have put down his glass and said, "Because, when I was a boy, the cleverest man in the room was not allowed to touch me. And the woman who was not allowed to be in the room at all put her hands on my leg and kept it. I have never got over the arrangement. I do not intend to."